She was 4 years old, and she had never seen anything so beautiful in her entire life. Lily Martinez stood completely still at the edge of the grand ballroom, her tiny head tilted all the way back, her dark, curly pigtails falling behind her shoulders, her brown eyes wide and unblinking as she stared up at the crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling above her like 1,000 pieces of frozen light. Her small mouth had fallen open just slightly. Her hands hung loose at her sides. She was not touching anything. She was not making a sound. She was simply a child who had walked through the wrong door at the wrong moment and found herself inside something so far beyond her ordinary world that her entire body had forgotten how to move. And in that stillness, in that pure and defenseless wonder, she was the most honest thing in the room. She just didn't know it yet. And neither did the woman across the ballroom, who was about to make the worst decision of her life. Lily's mother, Rosa Martinez, had worked for Ethan Brooks for nearly 8 years. If you had asked anyone at the company to describe Rosa in a single word, most of them would have paused for a moment before answering, not because they didn't know, but because the word they were looking for was not the kind people use casually. The word was faithful. Rosa arrived before anyone else and left after everyone else. She noticed things that needed doing before anyone thought to ask. She moved through her work with the focused, unhurried quiet of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that most of what she contributed would never be acknowledged and had decided to contribute it anyway. She had been that way before her husband Carlos died, and she had become even more so afterward. Because grief has a way of stripping everything unnecessary away and leaving only what is essential. And what was essential to Rosa was Lily. Carlos Martinez had been a construction worker, a broad-shouldered and gentle man who used to sing in the kitchen on Sunday mornings and call Lily his little sunrise because she always woke up happy. He kept a small photograph of Rosa in his chest pocket every single day he went to work because he said it made him feel like he was carrying the best part of his life directly over his heart. He had plans. He was saving money carefully, a little each month, toward a house with a yard where Lily could run barefoot in the summer grass the way he had as a boy growing up in a small town outside of San Antonio. He talked about that yard the way other men talk about their greatest ambitions, with a kind of reverent and patient certainty, as though the future were already decided and only the calendar needed to catch up. He died on a Tuesday in November 5 years ago when a scaffolding collapse at a downtown Dallas job site took him and one other worker in under 4 seconds. Rosa had been at work when she got the call. She had sat down on the floor of the supply closet and stayed there for 11 minutes because her legs would not hold her and she did not want anyone to see her face. Then she stood up, washed her face at the utility sink, and went back to work. Because Lily was 8 months old and rent was due on the 1st, and love without provision is just a feeling. She never talked about that day. She carried it the way certain people carry the heaviest things, which is silently and without complaint and with their shoulders perfectly straight. The photograph from Carlos's chest pocket now sat on the nightstand beside Rosa's bed, and every morning when she woke up, and every night before she closed her eyes, she looked at it. And the looking was its own kind of conversation. Ethan Brooks had built his real estate empire across Texas and beyond, and the business world admired him for reasons that had almost nothing to do with who he actually was. They admired the portfolio, the developments, the returns, the vision. What they did not know was that Ethan still remembered being a boy sitting in empty office lobbies at midnight doing homework with a backpack that had a broken zipper his family could not afford to fix, waiting for his mother to finish mopping the hallways so they could ride the bus home together. His father spent 30 years repairing air conditioning units in brutal Texas summers, coming home each evening with grease on his hands and a quietness that was not sadness, but simply the particular exhaustion of a man who had given everything the day required and had a little left over for his family and nothing left over for himself. His mother worked 2 jobs and hummed to herself in the dark, so the loneliness of late nights would not feel so heavy. Ethan had watched both of his parents give everything they had to a world that rarely looked at them directly, and it had left something permanent in him, a quiet and unshakable understanding that dignity does not belong only to people who can afford the entrance fee. That understanding was not a philosophy for Ethan, it was a memory, and memories live deeper than philosophies ever could. Tonight was supposed to be the most beautiful evening of his adult life. Nearly 200 guests filled the grand ballroom of one of Dallas's finest hotels. The chandeliers that had stolen Lily's breath sparkled overhead. A jazz band played with the kind of effortless elegance that takes 20 years to make look easy. Champagne moved through the room on silver trays. The flower arrangements on every table had been selected by a designer whose waiting list ran 4 months long. Everything about the evening had been constructed to announce that Ethan Brooks and Claire Whitmore were a perfect match, and that the life they were building together would be one of grace and permanence and mutual excellence. The announcement had cost a great deal of money and was, at the moment Lily stepped through the service door, proceeding exactly according to plan. Claire Whitmore was the kind of beautiful that arrives with instructions. She had grown up in one of Dallas's oldest, wealthy families, had attended the right schools, summered in the right places, and understood without being taught that a room's entire atmosphere could be adjusted by how confidently you entered it. She was not a cruel woman in the broad sense. She donated to 3 charities, she remembered birthdays, she was capable of genuine warmth toward people she considered her equals, and that warmth was real and not performed. The problem was the size of that circle. It had always been small, and it had never once expanded downward. When she looked at the world, she saw it arranged in a very specific order, and that order felt to her as natural and permanent as gravity, and she had never had a reason to question it, until the evening she looked across her own engagement party and saw a 4-year-old child in a thrift store dress standing beside a flower arrangement and staring at the ceiling like she had just seen something holy. Rosa had not planned to bring Lily that evening. Her babysitter, Dorothy, a retired school teacher who lived 2 floors above them and loved Lily with the uncomplicated devotion of someone who had no grandchildren of her own, had called that afternoon with a fever and a voice full of genuine apology. Rosa had stood in her kitchen holding the phone and done the quiet arithmetic of someone who has no backup plan and no one else to call. She came so close to staying home. She stood at the window for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular, turning the decision over. But she knew how important the evening was, and she believed she could manage, and so she packed Lily's small blue bag with crackers and a juice box, and Button, the worn stuffed rabbit that went everywhere Lily went, its left ear slightly flattened from years of being held a certain way during sleep. She drove to the hotel, telling herself it would be fine. She settled Lily on a small sofa in the staff lounge and looked at her daughter with the expression mothers wear when they're asking more than they're saying out loud. Lily nodded with great seriousness. She would stay, she promised. She meant it completely at the time. For nearly 2 hours, everything held. Rosa moved through the kitchen and the ballroom perimeter with her usual efficiency, managing the small, invisible needs of a large event with the practiced calm of someone who has done this long enough that competence has become instinct. She checked on Lily twice and found her talking quietly to Button and working through her crackers with focused dedication. Then the dessert display needed restocking, and the kitchen pulled her attention for 4 consecutive minutes. And 4 minutes is an eternity when you are 4 years old, and the most magnificent room you have ever imagined is just beyond a door that has not fully latched. Lily pushed through the service door so gently it made no sound at all. She took 3 steps into the ballroom and stopped briefing for a moment. The chandelier above her was so large and so full of light that it did not seem like something a person could have made.
It seemed like something that had simply always existed, like the moon or the sky or the smell of her mother's coat. She forgot about Button. She forgot about crackers. She forgot the promise entirely. She tilted her head back as far as it would go and stared upward with the open, surrendered expression of a child receiving something too large and too beautiful to fully hold. 2 waiters nearby saw her and smiled without meaning to. She was bothering no one. She was simply standing at the edge of a world she had never known and finding it more wonderful than anything she had words for. Claire saw her from across the room. Her eyes moved from the child's face to the child's dress in less than 2 seconds, and something shifted in her expression, something small and practiced that the people who knew her well would have recognized immediately. She leaned toward the woman standing beside her and spoke in a voice calibrated with precision, loud enough for the surrounding guests, quiet enough to maintain the appearance of lightness. Did the catering staff start bringing their families? The laughter that followed was not the honest laughter of something genuinely funny. It was the careful, sideways laughter of people who were not sure whether to speak or stay silent and had chosen the path of least resistance.
Claire smiled and continued, her voice carrying the particular ease that certain people use when they have never once had to consider whether their comfort costs someone else something. I thought tonight was supposed to be elegant. Someone should probably take her back to the kitchen before she ends up in the engagement photos. An older couple near the bar exchanged a long and troubled look. A waiter a few feet away went very still and found something important to study on the floor. The jazz band played on, and beneath the music the room held a quality of silence that everyone present would carry home without quite being able to name it. Rosa heard every word from the kitchen doorway. She crossed the room without hurrying, because hurrying would have drawn more attention to Lily, and Lily did not deserve more attention of that kind. She knelt beside her daughter and smiled the way mothers smile when they are placing their whole body between their child and something the child cannot yet see or name. "There you are, sweetheart," she said softly. Lily turned from the chandelier with shining eyes and reached immediately for her mother's hand, and her small face held no awareness of anything in the room except joy. "Mommy," she whispered with breathless certainty, "the lights look like stars." Rosa lifted her daughter and held her close against her chest and pressed her lips to the top of Lily's head and held them there for just a moment longer than necessary. "I know they do, baby," she said quietly, her voice steady and warm and giving nothing away. "I know they do." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen with Lily in her arms, her head down, her shoulders straight, holding herself together with the particular and practiced discipline of a woman who has learned that some moments must be fully survived before they are allowed to be felt. Ethan had been standing 18 feet away. He heard every word Claire said. He watched Rosa's face in the moment she heard it. He saw the older couple go still. He watched Lily wave cheerfully to a guest who turned away without responding, and he watched her wave anyway, because she was 4 years old and did not yet know that some people make their decisions about who is worth acknowledging before the other person has finished raising their hand. Something settled in Ethan in that moment with the slow and total weight of a conclusion that has been a long time arriving. It was not anger. Anger is loud and temporary and asks to be noticed. What moved through Ethan was something quieter and more final than anger, something closer to the feeling of understanding a thing completely for the first time, of seeing someone you thought you knew standing in a light that shows you the true shape of them. He said nothing. He stood with his business partners for another several minutes, present in body and somewhere else entirely in every way that mattered. He already knew what he was going to do. He was simply waiting for the right moment to do it.
The right moment came 40 minutes later, when the room gathered for the formal toast and Claire stood beside him at the center of the ballroom with her champagne glass raised and her expression full of the serene confidence of a woman who believes the evening is arriving at its beautiful and inevitable conclusion. Ethan took the microphone. He thanked his guests warmly for being there. He looked out at the room of 200 people who had come to celebrate something he no longer believed in. And then he set his champagne glass down on the nearest table with a sound so quiet that the people closest to him later said they felt it more than heard it. He said that before the toast, he needed to say something true. He looked at Claire, and his voice remained kind, because he was a kind man, even in his hardest moments, perhaps especially then. He said that he had spent his whole life trying to build something worth being proud of, and that the things he was most proud of had nothing to do with buildings or balance sheets or the opinions of business magazines. He said that the most important thing he had ever learned from watching his parents work themselves to the bone in jobs that most people never think about, was that the way a person treats someone who cannot do anything for them is the only measurement of character that actually holds. He said that tonight he had watched someone he cared about look at a 4-year-old child and see something unworthy of basic human kindness, and that he could not build a life beside a heart that worked that way. He said it without raising his voice. He said it without cruelty. He said it the way you say something that is simply true and that you have already made peace with. Then he handed the microphone back to the event coordinator and walked through the silent room toward the kitchen. Rosa was standing at the back counter with Lily awake and alert in her arms, button pressed against her daughter's cheek when Ethan pushed through the kitchen door. Rosa looked up, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been waiting for a consequence they do not believe they deserve, but have prepared themselves to receive anyway. Ethan pulled a stool from beneath the counter and sat down so that he was level with her eyes. He told her he was sorry. He told her that what had happened was not something he was willing to accept, not in any space he was responsible for, not ever. And then he told her something she was not expecting. He told her that he was establishing a scholarship fund in the name of Carlos Martinez, specifically for the children of construction workers and service employees, and that Lily would be its very first recipient. Rosa's composure, which had survived everything the evening had thrown at it, broke quietly and without warning. She pressed one hand over her mouth and looked upward at the ceiling, the way people do when they are trying to hold tears in by sheer force of will. Lily, who had been watching Ethan with her large and solemn brown eyes, reached out and placed her small open palm on top of his hand and patted it twice, gently and deliberately, the way children offer comfort when they sense something large and important is happening around them that they cannot quite reach with words. Ethan looked down at her hand resting on his. He stayed very still. The kitchen was quiet around them, except for the distant sound of the jazz band playing a song in an empty ballroom. And in that quiet, something passed between the three of them that none of them would ever find exactly the right words for, but that all of them would carry for the rest of their lives. The Carlos Martinez Workers' Children's Scholarship Fund was established the following month with an initial contribution large enough to send 12 children to college in its first year. Rosa helped Ethan design the selection criteria because she understood what those families actually needed better than any consultant he could have hired, and because Carlos would have too, and honoring that felt right. They worked together on Tuesday mornings in a conference room, with bad coffee and good light, going through applications with the careful attention of people who understood exactly what was at stake for the families on each page. Gradually, without either of them planning it or naming it, those Tuesday mornings became something both of them began to look forward to. Lily turned 5 that spring, and Ethan arrived at the office on her birthday carrying a small yellow cake with her name written on it in pink frosting. Lily ate 2 pieces with the focused seriousness she brought to all things she considered important, and then fell asleep on a chair in the corner with frosting on her cheek and Button tucked under one arm. Rosa sat across the room and watched her daughter sleeping and felt something move quietly through her chest that she had almost forgotten the exact shape of, which was the simple and uncomplicated belief that the life ahead of them was going to be all right. What happened in that ballroom was never really about a dress. It was about what we choose to see when we look at another person, and what that choice reveals about the kind of life we are building inside ourselves. Claire looked at a 4-year-old child and saw a disruption. Ethan looked at the same child and saw a little girl who thought a chandelier looked like stars, and he understood that a person who could not see what he saw was not someone he could walk beside. The courage to act on that understanding, quietly and without performance, in front of 200 people who were expecting something entirely different, is not the kind of courage that appears in headlines, but it is the kind that shapes lives and outlasts everything else. Lily grew up knowing this story. It was told to her carefully and honestly when she was old enough to carry it, and it became one of the foundational truths of who she became, that she had been seen when it would have been easy not to see her, that someone had chosen her worth out loud, and that her father's name lived on in something that opened doors for children who had never been told those doors existed. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that dignity was never meant to be earned, if it made you think of someone who has been looked past or spoken over, or made to feel small in a room full of people who should have known better, please take a moment right now and subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories. We are here every single week with stories exactly like this one, stories about quiet courage and invisible sacrifice and the ordinary people who choose to see each other clearly when it would have been so much easier not to. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone today who needs to be reminded that kindness is never wasted and that one person choosing to speak up can change everything. These stories belong to all of us, and so does the reminder that we are all, in one way or another, still looking up at the light.
This story teaches that human dignity is unconditional and cannot be assigned or withdrawn based on wealth, clothing, or social position. It shows older American viewers that true character is revealed not in moments of comfort and ease, but in the unguarded moment when we believe no one important is watching. It honors the invisible and unacknowledged labor of working parents like Rosa and Carlos, who carry enormous weight in silence and without recognition. It demonstrates through Ethan that moral courage does not require a raised voice or a dramatic gesture, that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is set down a champagne glass in a quiet room and say something simply and completely true. It preserves the dignity of working people whose lives and losses are rarely commemorated publicly, and shows that their names and sacrifices deserve to be carried forward. For families, it opens an honest conversation about how we treat the people who serve us and what basic human decency actually requires of us. For younger viewers, Lily's story is evidence that being truly seen by one honest person at the right moment can become the foundation of an entire life.